Hi everyone. So today we're going to be talking about budgeting 101, so paid advertising campaigns for event professionals. I'd just like to introduce myself as well. So my name is Kirsty and I'm one of the growth managers here at Tag Digital. So just to start off with, if you guys have any questions throughout the duration of the webinar, if you guys want to scan the QR code here, it'll take you to Slido and where you can ask any questions. And also as well, there'll be a box at the bottom of each of the slides as well if you don't manage to capture the QR code now. So first up, a bit of a generic introduction as to why appropriate budgeting is important to your campaigns. First up, we have maximise your return on investment. Setting an appropriate budget helps to maximise your ROI on the campaign. When you invest in paid campaigns, you want to ensure that you're getting the most value for your money. By budgeting appropriately, you can ensure that you're spending the right amount of money to achieve the desired results. An appropriate budget also allows you to reach the right audience within your advertising. Different advertising platforms have different costs and reach different audiences. By budgeting appropriately, you can choose the advertising platform that best reaches your target audience and allocate your budget accordingly. A budget that is too small can limit the ability to test and optimize the campaigns. Testing and optimization are crucial to the success of any advertising campaign. We constantly make optimizations to the campaigns throughout the duration of the campaigns. So by budgeting appropriately, you can then allocate enough funds to test different ad creatives, targeting options, and optimization strategies to improve the performance of the campaign. And lastly, we have stay competitive. It's important as you need to remain competitive in your industry at all times. The competition for advertising space is super intense, and an appropriate budget allows you to compete effectively by bidding on the right keywords and targeting the right audience. If your budget is too small, you may not be able to compete effectively, and then overall you won't be able to achieve your desired results. There are a number of different ways and different factors as well that we must consider when identifying an appropriate budget. Number one, we want to set clear campaign goals. Before determining any budget, we have to define the goals of your campaign. So you need to have a think about what it is you would like to achieve from the campaign. Are you wanting new leads? Are you wanting exhibitor inquiries, visitor registrations, brand awareness? All of this must be taken into consideration when deciding on an appropriate budget, because each of these objectives all require different spends. Following on from setting clear campaign goals, it's important to note that the budgets differ between campaign objectives, like I just mentioned. Each campaign objective requires a different amount of budget to help achieve their goals. For example, your targeting for exhibitor promotion is way more specific, and therefore it does require less budget, as you will not need to run as many campaigns to achieve the desired results. The audiences at the XProm phase are entirely different to the audiences that you would target for VisProm, for example. At this point in your campaign, your main goal is to fill your exhibitor stands. Whereas for VisProm, for example, your audience is a lot bigger and your targets are also significantly higher. So you ultimately need more budget in order to achieve your goals and to reach both new and existing customers. The users at VisProm, you want them to attend your event, you want them to go and fill the room. So this is why we require more budget to do so, as you're really trying to push yourself out there and cover all bases. Our second factor is determining your target audience. Before assigning a budget, you need to identify the demographics. Who is your target audience? What platforms are they typically present on? These are all questions that you have to ask yourself. It's a crucial step when determining budget because it ensures that your advertising efforts are focused on the right people. By understanding who your target audience is, you can tailor your messaging and marketing tactics to appeal to their interests and needs, which will then increase the likelihood of them engaging with your content and taking your desired action of filling out your lead form or visitor registration, for example. Also, when you allocate your budget to campaigns targeting your audience, you can maximise your return on investment as well and ensure that your spend is being used efficiently. By reaching the right people, you can generate more qualified leads and also increase your conversions. Following quite nicely on from that as well is to choose your preferred platform. We all know that some of the platforms are more expensive than others, LinkedIn, so it's important that we take this into consideration. Similarly to determining your target audience, you need to consider where your audience is. So where are they more active? Where are you going to get the best results in terms of leads, in terms of visitor registrations, exhibitor inquiries? All of this needs to be taken into account. Determining your preferred platforms for your campaigns is a really important step as well, as it'll ultimately impact the performance of your campaigns. Different platforms have different strengths and weaknesses. So it's important that you select ones that align with your campaign objectives and also your target audience. For example, our XPROM campaigns, we would typically recommend utilising LinkedIn over Facebook, as we can be way more targeted on this platform and it receives higher quality leads than what we typically see on Facebook. We can utilise the on-platform lead generation on LinkedIn as well, which we find has a lower cost per lead as opposed to sending the user directly to your website. So there's lots of different information that has to be taken into account when you're looking at these different platforms as well. If you want to look at brand awareness, for example, then we've got DV360, your programmatic platform. This is really good at pushing out your brand to as many places as possible, whereas Google Display might not be the best fit if you want to be seen everywhere. Then we have look at the cost per acquisition of your campaigns. So there's two ways that you can do this. So if you have ran the campaigns in the past, you can look at the previous CPAs on those campaigns, or you can have a look at benchmarking tools, industry averages to calculate what you think your desired CPA might be. So this is a really good indicator of what type of budget you need on each of the desired platforms as well. So as well as having an overall cost per acquisition, you can also allocate individual cost per acquisitions to the platforms. So determining your CPA is important when looking at budgets for your campaigns because it helps you to understand how much you need to spend in order to acquire a new customer, how much it costs to attain a previous customer. CPA is the metric that we use when talking about the cost of your visitor registrations, for example. If you have a really good understanding of what your CPA is, you can ensure you're allocating enough budget to achieve your desired number of conversions. One thing to note is that your CPA will be higher depending on what objective you're optimizing towards. For example, during a VisProm campaign, your top of the funnel audience, which is the users that you have never really interacted with before, they're new to your brand, these will have a higher CPA because, like I mentioned a minute ago, they're not aware of your brand, so they'll cost more to convert. Whereas your remarketing or your brand campaigns, they will convert a much lower cost per acquisition because the user is already aware of your brand, they've interacted with your website, they know what keywords to search for when looking for you, so the CPA is going to be far lower there. So it's important that you account for all of this information when you're allocating your budget. At this point, I thought it'd be good to highlight some ways in which you could calculate your budget. It does get a bit technical here, but just bear with me. So first of all, I want to make a note and say that it's important to remember that your paid campaigns will account for around 20 to 30% of your overall target. So keep that in mind when you're sitting down to have a look at your overall targets. We then need to calculate a target CPA. So how we do this here at TAG is we look across similar events, we utilise our benchmarking tool, and we do have this in a report as well that you can access. And also as well, if we have run the campaign previously, we'll take a look at those results and work out a CPA that way. Once we have a rough idea of conversions and cost per acquisition, we then multiply these by each other to get your recommended media spend. So for the example shown at the moment, we are using an event within the food and beverage and hospitality industry. Here we can see that the overall target is 15,000. If we want to achieve 25% of that, this would sit at around 3,750 conversions. Then the CPA from our benchmarking report for the food and beverage and hospitality industry is £6.63. We then multiply our target conversions by our target CPA to reveal our recommended budget. So 3,750 multiplied by £6.63 equals a media spend of £24,862.50. We are more than happy to help figure out these recommended budgets as well if you do need a hand with it. We have all of the assets to do so, but this is a rough calculation that we like to do on our side to help us recommend to you guys as what we would see the best fit for a recommended budget. I do have another example as well, just to go over as well. So we have an example from the construction industry. Our overall targets here are 26,000, taking 30% this time. So 30% of 26,000 is 7,800. Our benchmarking CPA for the construction industry is around £3.79. So target conversions of 7,800 multiplied by our benchmarking CPA of £3.79 leaves us with a media spend of 29,562. So you can see how these fluctuate as well, depending on what industry, depending on the CPAs, depending on the targets. Lots of different aspects come into play here, as well as the audiences and the platforms. We have to look at also the figures as well. One thing that we have at TAG, which I find super useful, is our recommended platform spend. So it's really easy to look at this as well, to have a look and see what an appropriate budget would be. So we've put this table together outlining our recommended minimum spend per platform and also our minimum daily spend per platform. So you can see here for Google, we recommend a minimum of 3,000 for the campaign overall, and then a minimum of £40 per day. So ideally for all of our campaigns, we would like to run a full funnel approach to achieve maximum results. But if we are restricted by budget, we're then limited by the amount of campaigns we can run. And then the same goes for the other platforms as well. So if you are looking to spend a particular amount of money on one platform, for example, you could use this tool as a guideline to see what spend it would require. So this leads me on to the impact of limited budget. As you saw in the previous slide, we do have specific recommendations per platform when it comes to assigning budgets, which is why sometimes we have to limit the amount of platforms we're using depending on the budget we're provided, as if we spread the budget too thin, the campaigns will not perform. A smaller budget also hinders the ability to run multiple different language campaigns. This is because if you were to run an English campaign and an Arabic campaign, for example, your daily spend would essentially double so that you can run both languages to their full potential. By running the same campaign types in both languages, this would then allow you to do an even comparison in the languages when it comes to assessing the performance. So we don't want to run a full funnel approach on English and then only when we market on Arabic, because then it's not a fair comparison as well. So ideally, we'd like to run the same amount of campaigns for English versus the same amount of campaigns for Arabic, and make sure that we're targeting the same keywords, the same audiences. The only difference is the language, obviously. You would also limit the limited amount of campaigns that you'll be able to run. Like I just mentioned, we do like to run a full funnel approach for different objectives. So for example, this is when you would typically see your full funnel approach, where we'd run top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, and brand. So it's important to take this into consideration when allocating your budget. By running this full funnel approach, you're really maximizing your performance here. You're accessing the audiences that you don't usually interact with through your top of the funnel and your middle of the funnel, and then also you're interacting with the audiences that you interact with on a regular basis. So you're remarketing your brand, for example. So you're covering all bases. You're getting that new data, and then you're also nurturing them down the funnel into the remarketing stages. But then you're also as well targeting those who already interact with your brand. Similarly to the funnel campaigns, we can also be restricted by budget when it comes to running creative assets. LinkedIn's a perfect example for this, as it only allows us to run one creative asset to one audience. So if we wanted to run single images, videos, or carousels, we would need a larger budget to do so because each of those creative types would need an individual campaign. And lastly, this one is quite self-explanatory, but a limited budget will naturally just hinder the campaign's overall performance. If we do have a smaller budget and we're spreading it too thin, performance will be a lot slower and we might not achieve our desired results. A common question that we get asked by our clients quite frequently is, when is it best to add additional budget? And there's a couple of different stages of when we'd recommend adding this. So I've outlined a campaign timeline so you can see it a bit more clearly where we'd recommend adding this. First up, we have around the 6 weeks out from the campaign's end date. This is generally a really good indicator for assessing the impact of adding additional budgets to the campaigns. At this stage of the campaign, we're beginning to ramp up the spend, as this is typically when we start to see conversion numbers begin to rise. Around the 1 month out mark is the last chance we would recommend adding additional budget. The reason why we say this is because we want to ensure we're pacing the budget in line with performance. If we were to add a large amount of budget to the campaigns 2 weeks before the end date, we then run the risk of inflating the CPA, as we'll be trying to spend the budget in a shorter period of time. So daily spends will be a lot higher, and then that then causes the cost per acquisition to really fluctuate. We will always advise as well when we think is best to add additional budget. Again, this will be before the 1 month out mark to ensure that it will ultimately benefit the overall performance of your campaigns. So just have some questions now that I'll answer. Can I start with a small budget and add more? So ideally, we would recommend, again, starting with a smaller budget, purely because, like I mentioned, we pace the campaigns based off of the budget that we get given at the beginning. So if we do start to add more budget towards the end, the CPA can then fluctuate quite significantly. So if we can get a better idea of the amount of budget you have at the beginning of the campaigns, we can then provide you with a more accurate cost per acquisition, a more accurate number of conversions, and then we can also pace the budget a lot better. So ideally, if you start with a larger budget, you tend to get better results that way. Should we think of platforms first or budget? I think you need to think of your platforms first. I think it's important to really do your research and find out where your target audience is. I think don't put too much pressure on the budget side of it, because that will come. So I think once you have everything aligned in terms of your audiences, in terms of your targeting, what platforms to use, the budget would then come naturally after that, I think. But also as well, you can have a budget in mind and then slot it in that way. So there is two ways of looking at it, but I think it's important to just make sure that you're targeting the right people on the right platforms first before you then think too much into the budget side of it. Should we think of budgeting differently for different objectives? Yes, you should. Like I mentioned at the start, it's important that we utilize the budget appropriately. So if you are doing a brand awareness campaign, for example, that would require less budget than a VisProm campaign. So for awareness, you want to push your brand out there, pushing website traffic, for example. These campaigns can run for a shorter period of time, and they require less budget to do so because you're pushing traffic. Whereas VisProm campaigns, for example, they require a larger amount of budget because there's a conversion goal at the end of it. So you want the user to carry out an action, and also the campaigns run for a longer period of time, and essentially the targets are quite a bit higher there. So I think when it does come to looking at objectives, the budget does need to differ between objectives. Okay, well, thanks for joining, everyone. If you do have any more questions, you can drop me an email at kirsty@tagdigital.co.uk. I'd be more than happy to help.